we're not necessarily talking low capital costs. We're talking low ECN, low hanging fruit. Typically, in any building, the low hanging fruit, and even nowadays, where people think that they might have an optimal operation, is scheduling. Uh, and I give the recommissioning course, I give the BAS course. I've done audits with some of the people that are in attendance today. And surprisingly enough, the biggest number one measure, even in old brick and beam building, brick and beam building, they usually have been retrofitted with rooftop units. It's really optimize the schedule of the units. And again, it might sound like a no-brainer, but you'd be surprised how optimal scheduling is hardly ever done. And I always give the example. You got an old brick and beam building that has a VAV system, rooftop unit. And I've done a lot of audits in those buildings, and I know they do sometimes have those systems. Some people will start those systems 2 hours before occupancy, 3 hours before occupancy. And I always ask them, why? Well, we need to heat up the building. Let's say it's in the winter time. We have to make sure the building's hot enough when people come in. Well, a VAV system is not a heating system. There is no need to start that system prior to occupancy. Forget about the pandemic for a second. So if your people come into the building at 8 a.m., a VAV system in the wintertime does not need to be started before, let's say, 7:30, quarter to 8. With the pandemic, there's a rule that there's an ASHRAE calculation tool that will tell you how long ahead of time you need to start it, but it's a short period of time. You need to know what is the role of the HVAC systems I have. And very often the role of that HVAC system is ventilation and cooling, plus obviously filtration. None of that is usually heating related. So you can actually optimal start a lot of those systems way before. So if I were you, you're in a brick and beam building, you have 25 rooftop units. First thing I would make sure is that none of them are running earlier than needed, and none of them are running later than needed. And when it's heating season, they usually do not need to run a long time, if at all, before occupancy. They need to start running early only for cooling purposes. And then, second one, and then I'm going to stop, Olivier. Once you've done that, when you're in those old brick and beam buildings that have been retrofitted with like tons of rooftop units, is proper control. You'll see a lot of mixed up thermostat. I've seen so many of those where they do not always know where the thermostat for a given rooftop is located. And you end up with systems, different rooftop units, having the wrong set points, the wrong controls, the wrong schedule, because they are not actually controlled using a thermostat located in the zone where the diffusers are actually located. So this actually falls into recommissioning, but in those type of buildings, something I've seen many times, unfortunately.
Thank you, Michel. And I've also heard you speak a number of times about the importance of scheduling. And I think that applies basically in any setting, no matter how old the building is.
Yeah, and in those old brick and beam building, the one thing you have to be very careful about is changing too much the temperatures. For example, I'm a big fan of setbacks, but brick and beam buildings can be really tricky to do a setback because they can have a real hard time catching up with the temperature. So I would be very careful about that one. I would, if I were to go down to those, it's an easy measure to do a setback, I would do a functional test. Otherwise, you may end up with a whole lot of problem rather than actual energy savings.